Hello, dear colleagues. My name is Dmitry, and I work for the Dmitry Nikitin School. And today we are on a stream with our good friend, a person with great personality, Maureen McGarvey, who is
Hello.
working for Maureen McGarvey Consultancy in London, consulting English language teaching specialists. And Maureen has huge experience working on ELT internationally, and her last job was for IH London. Is that correct, Maureen?
That's correct. I was program manager for eLearning there.
And Maureen's big passion is observation. Maureen is going to run a course for the Dmitry Nikitin School in very close collaboration with the Dmitry Nikitin School in January, at the end of January 2024. Oh my God, time flies, isn't it? And I mean, it is, isn't it? And she's going to run an intensive course on how to create observation systems within organizations. And that's why we would like to tell you more about the course and to chat friendly about observation. Maureen, could you introduce yourself to our audience first?
Well, as Dmitry Sergeyevich just said, my name is Maureen McGarvey and I run Maureen McGarvey Consultancy from London. I've been working with the Dmitry Nikitin School for several years now.
For
And
72 years, I think.
it feels like 72 sometimes, I'm sure. Um, and my areas of special interest are organizational change and development and supporting and managing that, and teacher development and teacher development programs within a whole school context. And in particular, the role of observation within those. I've been a director of studies for teacher training in two large organizations overseas. And I wrote the module in educational management for the Masters in TESOL program run by Aston University. And I've also tutored on the educational management program for the MA TESOL at Westminster University.
That's a huge piece of work, isn't it?
It was a lot of work, yeah.
Let's jump into the topic of our stream today, which is observation. So I know you're passionate about creating observation systems and about observing classes. So what is behind your passion, Maureen? Because I think there are more interesting things in life than observation systems. Why are you passionate about observation systems in English language teaching organizations?
Well, it's not the only thing I'm passionate about. I have got other things I'm interested in. But I'm interested in it partly because of the disconnect that seems to occur between organizations or school directors or directors of studies who will say observation is the best way to develop your teachers. But the experience of teachers being observed often is not one of development at all. I was talking to a group of teachers recently, and their experience of observation was of being judged, of being criticized, of being evaluated and found to be less than satisfactory. So in that kind of climate, it's very hard to feel that observation is developmental. And I also think that the majority of people who observe practicing teachers have no real training in the processes of observation. That's true of many jobs in academic management. You train to become a teacher and then you move into a management role for which you have no training. And so the reality is often that they observe teachers the way that they were observed. And that's not always helpful.
Isn't that important to begin with the understanding that observation is huge and there are different kinds of observation? And I know that we both, with you, Maureen, we share this view of observation being developmental for teachers. However, there are different types of observation, and I wanted to establish this issue at the beginning of our talk, that you can use observation as a way to deal with complaint from a customer, and you have to attend a lesson when your customer complained, or you can have observation as part of a course, for example, and you have criteria. And as an observer, I can tell you, Maureen, I disagree with the criteria. I disagree that every lesson should begin with a warm-up, but according to the criteria, that's what I'm doing. And there are different types of observations, which we call trust-based. And I think that there are different methods which can be used towards different observation types.
Yes, but I also think that a great deal depends on the culture of the organization within which you work. And you know, that's another thing that I'm really very passionate about. Because in your example of a student complaint, for example, if a student comes to the director or director of studies and complains, and that director of studies takes the logical step of going into the class to actually see what's happening with that student in the class, very often the teacher feels very vulnerable and very on the spot, in that situation. If the culture of the school is not one of, hi, Dimitri Sergeyevich, I've had Magdalena in, she said she's not very happy with the class. What's she actually like in the class? Can you talk to me a little bit about her? How does she get on with the other students? Does she participate? Before I see Magdalena again, it might be a good idea for me to come into the class just so I can see what she's like. That's a very different approach to Dimitri Sergeyevich. We've had a student complaint. I'm coming into your class to observe. Now, the result of those two conversations is exactly the same, but the intention is very different, and the feeling of the teacher is very different. In the first conversation, it's, Magdalena has a problem. Can you tell me what she's actually like? Can I come in to actually see what she's like? And then we can talk about it. So a lot depends on your organizational culture in the examples that you have. In the case of criteria, criteria are fascinating. I don't know of many language teaching organizations that have actually taken time to define a set of observation criteria in discussion with the teachers who are going to be observed. Yeah? And I do feel for it to work properly, it needs to be a democratic process where the staff bodies say, yes, this is what in this language teaching organization we believe we want to see in our classes. Now, you can look at frameworks, and we talk about this in the course. You've got the British Council teaching framework. You've got the equals teaching framework. You've got CELTA criteria. But very often, people will observe teachers who passed their CELTA 2, 3, 4 years ago, and they'll still evaluate them on the criteria for the qualification they gained 4 years ago. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's almost like saying, okay, you don't need to develop beyond this point. I'm going to use these initial criteria with you.
I see exactly what you mean, Maureen, and a lot of criteria I use to observe classes which were given to me by a different organization, they all had this point, warm up. If you have warm up, you have 1 point plus. If you don't have warm up, you have 1 point minus. And then to me, well, first of all, there is no any theoretical support of having warm up at the beginning of the class.
Yeah.
And there's a beginning of delta course for you when they're going to tell you that there is no theoretical support for having warm up at the beginning of the lesson. You can just start teaching. Yeah, and then a lot of teachers run warm up. Sometimes there is nothing wrong in it as well, but a lot of teachers do not. And I don't really appreciate the idea of taking other organizations or which was other courses criteria for the whole organization. And I do love this idea of hours to create together their criteria for observation. Okay, so if I don't want to lose a friend while observing her class, what should I do, Maureen? Because very often you observe your colleagues' class and then you give some feedback like, oh, I loved your lesson, but you can get rid of a couple of grammar mistakes and I think you can improve your pronunciation and get rid of your Russian accent, but I love the lesson. And then in the morning you say hello nicely to her and she doesn't speak to you and you
Yes.
lose a friend forever. What should we do not to lose friends while observing them?
I think this can happen, and it often does happen, because of what I call role strain. That your role as an observer is different from your role as a friend. And so you are, if you like, almost a professional friend, in that you have a friendly relationship with your colleagues. But when you're observing them, your relationship is different. And I think in the example that you gave, Dimitri Sergeyevich, which we both know, and I'm sure people watching will know, is genuine, does happen. It's often because the observer focuses on the teacher's performance and doesn't focus on the learners and what's happening with the learning and the students in the classroom. And because I must have said this to you 150 times at least, that in my belief, the whole point of any CPD is for the students. And if by observation we can develop our teaching to get better learner outcomes, then that's a positive thing. But if you start by saying, okay, so you didn't have a warm-up, okay, or as happened with a colleague of mine, you didn't use any educational technology in the lesson. Well, yes, because it wasn't appropriate. Yeah, but you're still losing a mark for not using it. Then, and that is going to affect your final evaluation as a teacher in this organization. Then you're focusing purely on performance and you're not giving the teacher any opportunity to actually reflect on what's happening with his or her learners and what's happening with their learning and how are they contributing to that.
I think it has very strong connection with your professional training to be an observer as well, because as you mentioned, Maureen, there is a role of being a friend and there is a role to be professional or, as we say, critical friend. But there is also a role of a teacher. We act in the organization. And as teachers, we think that language feedback is appropriate to our learners because our learners pay us money to give them language feedback and language upgrade. And there is not many other things we can actually do apart from language feedback and language upgrade of our learners' language. But then when we are observing, we act a completely different role. We are not teachers any longer. And especially if we are in horizontal mode of communication with you, you are a teacher, I'm a teacher, I'm observing your class. I don't think I have the right of giving you any language feedback or methodological strong advice. Talking about language feedback, I don't have this right simply because your language is not going to change. I haven't seen any person who changed their language pattern after one correction. Never, never, ever. But by giving language feedback, you basically ruin the productive discussion. Because when you give me language feedback, especially if you're a native speaker or a very competent speaker and you are giving me language feedback, I'm going to be stressed for the whole period of post-observation discussion, which should take place. But I have a lot of arguments with my colleagues. If a teacher is making a grammar mistake or pronunciation mistake or any language mistake, are we qualified? Do we have the right to somehow give language feedback to the teacher whose lesson we are observing?
I have observed classes where students have walked in knowing a grammatical structure, let's say second conditional, and the teacher has systematically untaught the second conditional. So they have gone out knowing less than they did when they came in. And I have observed that on many an occasion. Now, in that situation, the conversation with the teacher would look at what happened with the student's understanding of that grammatical structure in the lesson. Again, it's not what happened with the student. But in terms of correcting a colleague's grammar in their classroom interlanguage and their classroom dialogue, I think that's a very dangerous path to take for a number of reasons. One, you're kind of completely changing the power dynamic. As you said, Dimitri, you know, I'm the correct one, you're the incorrect one. Let's get that straight at the beginning. Secondly, it gives the idea that all native speakers never make a grammar mistake, which, if you listen to people speaking in the classroom, that's not true. Pronunciation mistakes. Would I, as a native speaker, correct the pronunciation of a native speaker from Scotland? Or a native...
No, you wouldn't. That's simply dangerous.
Of course I wouldn't. Of course I wouldn't. How arrogant would that be? So, well, you must lose your Russian accent. Why? Your accent is your identity. It's your culture. Why would you want to lose that? That's who you are. So I think the idea that you put in the phrase that you used of a critical friend is an important one, because I may have, and we do look at that in the course, we look at a couple of theoretical models, if you like, of supervisory dialogue, to look at the different stages and what the implications of those different models are. They're two very well-known ones. One is by Wallace and Woolger, and one is by Gebhardt, models of supervision. And I think what you're trying to establish is that you're a teacher, I'm a teacher, and we're talking about your teaching and your students' learning. Now, I might have some tips that I can give you from my experience that might make certain things go more smoothly, and they're very often in the areas of classroom management, actually, things that teachers can forget, very simple things like give the instructions before you give the activity or the text. Don't give the text and then give the instructions, because learners can't concentrate. But our purpose with developmental observation is to encourage the teacher to reflect on what happened and for the teacher to come up with their solutions. Okay, so talk to me about this part of the lesson. What happened? Were you happy with what happened? Would you like a different outcome? How could you get a different outcome? And where could you shift? What could you do? So it's not, as I often say, jug and mug, you know, that I have a jug of knowledge and I'm going to lift off the top of your head and pour it into the mug of your head, and then you will have all this knowledge. Because I might have more experiential knowledge in a broader sense, but you know that class and those learners. I'm in there for an hour. You've been working with them for some time, so reflect on what happened and reflect on what you'd like to happen, and let's talk about how you can get there.
I've been thinking quite a lot recently about my lessons, and that's fascinating that lessons which I thought were absolutely brilliant, and I conducted them personally like 20 years ago, now I think they're rubbish. And lessons which I thought were disastrous, now I think they were really good lessons. There were a lot of lessons somewhere in between, but generally, have you ever had this experience, Maureen, that you thought that your lesson you taught 10 years ago or 20 years ago. That was a brilliant lesson, but actually it wasn't, only because it had 25 songs by Beatles included in it, incorporated in it. And I go to observations with these feelings that how do I know that what I know is correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's always the difficult thing, isn't it? Because knowledge isn't finite and we don't reach a place, particularly as teacher educators and observers, we never reach a place where we can say, well, I know it all now. And because there's so much research constantly happening that changes the perception, I certainly can think of lessons 20 years ago that I thought were amazing, that now I would put my head in a bucket before I would teach that lesson again. And the reason that I probably thought they were amazing lessons is because I was doing a lot of stuff. And I was quite center stage, and I was like, a conductor directing the orchestra or the ringmaster in a circus, And now the amazing bits is it. Whereas I think the more you teach, the more you tend to focus on I sound like a broken record, but it is a fundamental thing. Focus on the learners and the quality of the learning. And much of that work for teachers happens outside the classroom when we're planning and we're selecting materials and we're designing activities. And then in the classroom, our role is to facilitate the learning for our students. Now, sure, I mean, it's different with different age groups. With very young learners, you do need lots of activity and mix and switch, to keep the pace going. But with different age groups, I think we can allow a lot more focused work on the part of the student and allowing space for language to emerge and for us as teachers with the students to work on that emergent language to broaden their pool of competence, if you like.
I think that this is a great idea, and I do not think that you sound like a broken record.
Thank you.
In Russian, we have an expression, I've already told it 100 times, or I've already told it to you 10 times. And I think that's a ridiculous expression because 10 times and 100 times is simply not enough. I don't know any person who learned anything after 10 times repetition only.
Yeah.
Normally we repeat more. And this fact of being concentrated on learners is crucial, isn't it? So, and I really liked your idea, and I think it's a bit distressing for teachers that talking about the lesson is more talking about our learners. That's less egoistic and distressing at the same time, and that's exciting talking about your learners. You are going to run a course, Maureen, in close collaboration with the Dmitry Nikitin School at the end of January on observation. Could you tell us a few words about the course? What's going to be on the course? It's an online course and anybody can join.
Yes, I mean, I love working with this course, and the course is divided into 2 days, 2 mornings. And in the first day, we look at different attitudes to observation, a possible observation procedure that I'll put to you that we can discuss. We'll talk about, should you ask for lesson plans before observation? Yes, no, what are the benefits, what are not? We'll look at using frameworks and we will talk about criteria for observation. Then on the second day, we look at the language of giving feedback to teachers, because this is an area which many of us find quite difficult. We look at how to encourage teacher reflection on practice. We look at, as I say, Wallace and Woolger's models of supervisory dialogue and Gebhardt's models of supervision. And we also look at critical incident analysis and writing observation reports. Yeah? So there's a balance, if you like, of the participants' own lived experience, some theoretical input, and quite a lot of opportunity for us to share ideas and unpick what would be appropriate in our current context.
Would you continue the sentence, Maureen? I think, dear colleague, you should join the course because.
We can learn from you and you can learn from us.
Nobody could have said it better, Maureen.
Thank
Thank you very much. I can imagine how hectic your life is, having all the entertainment in London, plus your company, Maureen McGarvey Consultancy. Thank you for your time, Maureen, and thank you, dear colleagues, for visiting our stream. I hope you will join the course, and the link will be here or there somewhere, maybe here and there, and you just follow the link and you can join the course. So have a good day. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, dear colleagues. Always remember how wonderful you are, and bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Bye.